Hello and welcome back. We're now into the mini lecture 1E, part of chapter 1. Mini lecture 1E. This section we're going to go into homeostasis to define and to be able to understand homeostasis. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is going on within our body continually. The same as the cells are breaking down our food, our metabolism, catabolism, and in that same instance, homeostasis is working as well too. So homeostasis is to be in a constant state of internal balance. Homeostasis is a dynamic balance, an achievement of a steady state. It's the body's internal environment remaining the same under ever-changing external conditions. It is regulated by both our nervous system and the endocrine system. Either they're working together or they're working independently. So an organism is said to be in homeostasis when its internal environment contains the optimum, the best, the most concentration of gases, nutrients, ions, and water. That it has an optimal temperature, that the body remains at a constant temperature. And that, of course, we have optimal volumes of healthy cells. Because if we don't have an optimal volume of healthy cells, and we have some sick cells, then we're not going to be very well. So the body has to keep a balance, an internal balance of healthy cells. It has to have a constant state of optimal temperature. And we need to have that dynamic balance and constant state of gases, of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, protein, carbohydrates, our ions, our elements, and of course, water. Very important. So homeostasis has a control mechanism. Of course, we have to have a stressor. Something has to happen within the body to bring a stress so that homeostasis control mechanism can cut in to be able to work. So it has to have a response, and that response feeds back to the influence of that stimulus. We have a control center, a thermostat, in our brain called our hypothalamus. And then any imbalance, whether it's nutritionally, whether it's fluids, water, liquids, salts, whether it is sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, whether it is sugar, whether it is our glucose, our fructose, our pectose, all the different sugars, whether it's in our chemicals, the vitamins, the area affected will notify that hypothalamus via a system called a negative feedback system. And this negative feedback system or loop is in continuous use through our body, adjusting our body to be at that optimal, good, steady state. So there is a response that feeds back to the influence of that stimulus. Something happened in the body to bring an imbalance. The information goes to that control center, our thermostat, our hypothalamus. And then via a system called a negative feedback system, we need to be brought back into balance. So, our feedback components. As I said a minute ago, we have to have a stressor. Some kind of stress will happen in the body to bring in the receptor, the control center, and the effector. So the receptor is the body structure which monitors these changes in the control conditions and sends input to the control center. The control center, the brain, our sometimes hypothalamus, sets a range of values with a controlled condition which should be maintained, balanced. It evaluates the input and generates an output commands when they are needed. And then we have an effector, whether it is the nervous system or our endocrine system, a body structure that receives that output and produces a response or effect which changes that controlled condition. Whether it needs to decrease something, whether it needs to increase something, whether it needs to send hormones out to balance the body, whether it needs salt, whether it needs sugar, whether it needs to warm up, temperature control. The effector, the body structure that receives the output, will affect the changes in that controlled condition. So there are two feedback systems, a negative feedback system and a positive feedback system. So the negative feedback system or feedback loop regulates the conditions in the body that remain stable over long periods, where we need that balance, where we need that continuity over long periods of time. Negative feedback system counteracts any inappropriate change, thus restoring it to an appropriate state. Counteracts any inappropriate change. So, it restores it to an appropriate state. Any imbalance within the cells will let the hypothalamus know that a negative feedback system is needed. It slows and then stops as the controlled condition returns to its normal state. So a negative feedback system is used for temperature control, whether the sun has made us too hot, whether we're too hot, we need to cool down, or whether we are in a very cold climate, a freezing cold climate, and where we need to warm back up again. The negative feedback system will help the body and tell the body what it needs to do to return to its normal state. So, as long as the body's controlled conditions remain within certain narrow limits, the body cells function effectively. Negative feedback systems maintain that homeostasis and the body remains healthy. But if one or more parts of the body lose that ability to maintain homeostasis, that normal equilibrium may be disturbed. If there is an imbalance within the systems, a disorder or a disease may occur. At its worst, if the body is really, really badly imbalanced, and if it is severe, there may even be death. We need to have our homeostasis. We need to have this internal balance for our optimal cells, our optimal healthy life. The body has two feedback systems, feedback loops, negative and positive. The negative one counteracting any problems found within the body. The Positive ones set off a series of events that intensify the changes. The body only has a few positive feedback loops. So some of the positive feedback systems disrupt that steady state and could lead to death if not halted quickly. So the hormone oxytocin is a good example that's used during childbirth. The oxytocin is released from the pituitary gland and is continually released with each contraction during labour till the baby is born. And then, of course, we need to have a negative feedback to turn it off. Another example associated with a positive feedback is the decreased blood pressure associated with hemorrhaging. Hemorrhaging can be fatal if the hemorrhaging is not stopped or staunched. So these are positive feedback systems. Here is the illustration of feedback loops that you have in your textbook, page 10. It's just give you an idea. The first one is a negative feedback loop. A is a negative feedback loop and B is a positive feedback loop. In the negative feedback loop, the sun is the stressor and has caused the person to heat up and to get hot. The body temperature increases above that steady state. Specialized nerve sensors detect a change. We're getting hot. Then the sensors signal a temperature regulating center in that hypothalamus, our control center. And it sends messages out to the homeostatic mechanisms to decrease that body temperature. So the body temperature decreases back to its homeostasis level. Whether the person just needs to take a drink of water, whether the person needs to get a towel and apply cold water, however that person needs to cool down, the body will tell the person how it's to cool down and to resume back to homeostasis. In B, it's a positive feedback loop. And its stressor is a serious cut, a hemorrhage. There's a lot of blood being lost there, a serious blood loss. So the person's blood pressure then starts to decrease and less blood circulates to the heart. The cardiac output decreases and that heart pumps less blood going around. And this will just keep on going around into this loop of blood pressure decreasing, less blood, and then the cardiac decreasing until something is done about staunching that serious blood loss. And it's not till that blood loss is stopped that we will regain some negative feedback and improve the situation. So, in respect, talking about disorders and diseases, we'll go just into that just a little bit about symptoms and signs at the same time. So with a disorder, it's just any abnormality of function or structure of the body. Things that we usually can get better, that the body will repair and get better again. Again, restoring that homeostasis, restoring that balance. So things like strains and sprains, headaches, nausea, colds, fever, flu, any kind of abnormality of function that can, in time, heal itself. A disorder. And with a disease. So a disease is just a specific term for an illness, shown by recognizable signs and symptoms. A disease, like cancer, polio, heart attack, stroke, paralysis. They have recognizable signs and symptoms. So the differences between signs and symptoms. Signs are an objective changes that a clinician can observe and measure. Things that we can look at a person and we can actually see changes in that person, whether there are swellings, rashes, person has a fever, pain, paralysis, even the turning blue of a person's lips. They are signs. Then we have symptoms. These are subjective changes in body functions that are not apparent to an observer, to anyone that you're with in the room or you're walking down the street. You may not realize that the person opposite you may have a headache, that they are nauseous and feeling sick, or that they have any anxiety. Even things like sight or the lack of sight to short-sightedness, long-sightedness, sight that even with hearing. These are subjective changes of body functions that are just not apparent to an observer. So the differences between signs and symptoms. So body fluids are extremely important part of homeostasis in maintaining that volume and that composition of body fluids within and without the cells. The fluid within our cells is called intracellular fluid. The fluid outside the cells and in between each of the cells is called extracellular fluid. It's also called interstitial fluid. So the proper function of the body cells depends on that precise regulation of the makeup of fluid around them, and to be balanced with the fluid inside the cells as well too. So the fluid inside the cells needs to be balanced with the fluid on the outside of each of the cells. The extracellular fluid is also called the body's internal environment, and this is where the exchange of materials occurs within the cells. So you have all probably heard about dehydration. You have probably experienced dehydration. And this is when the cells are in imbalance. They are not balanced. The fluids are not, the intracellular is not balanced with the extracellular. There is dehydration. So, of course, a person needs to go and drink some more water, maybe with some electrolytes, some minerals in it, to regain that homeostasis of our fluid balance. Body fluids. So our conclusion, homeostasis then The definition: the internal body's ability to remain balanced and constant under ever-changing external environments. To be able to find that steady state. Some other definitions are to be in a constant state of internal balance under those ever-changing external conditions. But these may also be physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually. So the conditions, those external outside conditions as climate, the weather, hot or cold extremes, even our environment, our poisons, our pollution, any infections, our social conditions, and even our oxygen or even the lack of oxygen. Homeostasis is the basis of good health. It is a dynamic balance. It's a dynamic balance among those components between the body and the environment. It's an achievement of a steady state. That we have a condition in which the body's internal environment remains within certain physiological limits and even psychological limits. For the body to survive, the combination of those surrounding fluids must be precisely maintained at all times. We must have that optimum concentration of gases, nutrients, ions, and water. We must have that optimal temperature. We must have that optimal volume of healthy cells. So negative feedback counteracts any imbalanced situation within our body, within our cells. The positive feedback intensifies the imbalanced situation, and it must have a negative feedback to revert that positive feedback to a balance. Homeostasis.